This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 169 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we are going to learn about a new school in Philadelphia where educators stopped reimagining school in their heads and actually built it from scratch. It's called Revolution School. In almost every conversation I have with another educator, as long as we have the luxury of time to let our thoughts wander around some, we end up at a place where we start to fantasize. In talking about problems and challenges of teaching or of school in general, one of us will say something like, "If only we had more time in the day with students," or "Wouldn't it be great if students could just work on big long-term projects that really meant something to them?" Or "I would love to get students out in the community solving real problems and making a real impact." Usually, the fantasy dissolves after a few seconds when the dreamer remembers the limitations placed on them by standardized tests, lockstep schedules, pacing guides, and grading expectations. A set of constraints that all fall under the umbrella of the way we've always done things. Most people locked in these systems have dreams of how things could get better, but they have no idea where to start. Some teachers figure it out by building a school within a school, like the three who started the Apollo School, a 3-hour interdisciplinary program at a high school in York, Pennsylvania. I interviewed them back in 2017 in episode 62, and they are still going strong today. Others do it within a single class period, like Indiana teacher Don Wettrick did with his innovation class. That was also 2017, episode 83. Other people go even further and start from scratch, building a whole new school with that fantasy at the center, rather than forcing the fantasy to work around existing limitations. Today, we'll be looking at a school like that, Philadelphia's Revolution School. Currently nearing the end of its second school year, this high school is the end product of a group of brave, forward-thinking educators who saw what education could be, and instead of trying to work within the system, asked themselves, why don't we just build it? I'll be talking to 3 people from Revolution: Henry Fairfax, who is Revolution's head of school, Jane Shore, their head of research and innovation, and Mike Pardee, one of Revolution's master educators. I want to be clear about why I'm dedicating a whole episode of my podcast to this one school, because I realize that almost everyone listening is in a situation where they can't necessarily replicate what this school is doing. It would be understandable if you listened to what they're doing and thought, well, that sounds great, but it's basically impossible in my district. I am sharing what this school is doing because I want you to start thinking about ways you could do something kind of like this. How you might be able to reconfigure some part of your school day, collaborate with other teachers, reach out for community partnerships, and at the very least, brainstorm some possibilities. Although this exact thing may not be doable, at least maybe not in the near future, in your school, it might look like an elective, a 2-hour combined class, a special program within your school, or even a summer program you might launch together with a few other teachers. As Mike Pardee puts it, a group of crazy innovative people who are willing to take such a leap. My hope with this episode is to get you thinking about what your leap might look like. One last thing before we dig in, I would like to thank Studio for sponsoring this episode. Today by Studio is a free add-on to Google Classroom, which allows students to track and plan all of their classwork with tools that allow students to estimate how much time a task will take and divide larger tasks into smaller ones. Teachers can also track how each student is handling their workload over time. This is a valuable tool to share with parents during parent-teacher meetings to help each student plan their work and pace themselves for longer-term projects. Coaching students on being better organized has a direct impact on their grades as well as their long-term success, and together we can make a difference. Today is free for individual teachers. School and district plans come with added features like timetable import, student-entered tasks, and LMS integrations. Visit studio.co/pedagogy to create your free account now and get your students planning. That's study, studio.co/pedagogy. Support also comes from Parlay. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have a class discussion where everyone, even the quietest students, participated? Well, it's possible with Parlay. Parlay helps teachers facilitate student-centered, inclusive, and data-driven class discussions. Through written discussion activities called online roundtables and verbal discussion activities called live roundtables, Parlay helps students develop true agency as they learn to introduce their own unique ideas, ask questions, and build on or challenge the ideas of others. There's also a library with thousands of ready-made discussion prompts for every subject. The best part? Parlay's suite of instructional tools transition seamlessly between in-person, online, and hybrid learning environments. Try Parlay for free today at parlayideas.com and learn why thousands of teachers all over the world are raving about this amazing new tool. Now here's my interview with Henry Fairfax, Mike Pardee, and Jane Shore of Revolution School. So I would like to welcome you all from the Revolution School. I'm going to ask you each to introduce yourselves and let us know who you are and what you do for the school.
So my name is Henry Fairfax. It's awesome to be here with my teammates, and thank you for having us. I am the head of school at Revolution School, and I've been here since our opening days, September 4th, 2019. I was also here when we started our year planning down at 230 South Broad Street in Philadelphia. So really excited to be here again. Thank you, and joined by a couple of awesome teammates.
Yeah, thanks, Henry. I am thrilled to get connected. So happy to be on the podcast. My name is Jane Shore. My official title is Head of Research and Innovation at Revolution School, and I think I part of the team just about when Henry joined as well. We had a luxurious year prior to starting. We call a year zero. So before starting the school and opening in 2019, we did a lot of planning and preparation. And my role is really around the questions that we're all asking. We really consider our school as a part of a larger group of innovative thinkers and doers that are engaging in this question about reimagining school.
And my name is Mike Pardee. My role here is essentially to be the transdisciplinary humanities teacher, implementing aspects of English or ELA, some people might say, history, even social studies, in a way that blurs disciplinary boundaries between and amongst all those, but also builds bridges to real things that are happening out in the real world to give a sense of real world engagement and purpose to the things that we're studying.
So the way that I found you was through a completely separate conversation about, it was a post that I wrote a little while ago called The Elegance of the Gray Area that had to do with fuzzy thinking and, and Jane ended up linking to something else that kind of related to that. And I saw her artwork and I was immediately riveted by that. And that sent me down a rabbit hole of finding your school and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank
you. And I was just blown away by what you were doing. I'm always looking for, I think we do so much talking on Twitter and in education spaces about reimagining schools, but I think so many schools just don't know how to do it. And you all are doing it. So I really wanted to just put a spotlight on what you're doing and see if maybe there are pieces of what you're doing that other schools can try to replicate. So if one of you could just give me a really quick description of how Revolution School works, and then we're going to actually get into all the details. But how is it different from a typical high school?
One of the things that Henry Fairfax always says is that we have sort of lyrics that we write together. While we go back and forth in describing what we are doing as a school, I think part of it it's really rooted in this idea of co-creation.
Mm-hmm.
Our school is designed to be a progressive, place-based, project-based, whatever the P is, problem-solving
Mm.
school. We really see the city of Philadelphia as an extension of our classroom. So in the development of the school, and we talk about a year zero, we really looked to the ecosystem that is Philadelphia to understand, who's out there and, beyond our city, who's out there looking at reimagining school. And we began to look at the assets of our city and plan around a sort of systems thinking approach to education. So our school is all about co-creation with students and also co-creation with the community as we plan and thread the learning. I'm going to get the words wrong. There's some language around the weave, the warp and the weave, I think it's called.
Yeah.
This
Mm-hmm.
idea of threading sort of through our values, which really are rooted in joy and curiosity of learning, keeping that going in high school, empowerment of the students. We're also rooted in diversity, and we have some really intentional work around um, the layers of diversity, the layers of background, the layers of thought, the layers of perspective. And as Mike talked about, he is a transdisciplinary educator. But to fit nicely into the values, Mike realized it spells JEDI, so joy, empowerment, diversity, and integrated learning. And those values really drive the projects we do throughout the year. And we engage in 3 projects. So students are less in sort of like this 1 hour block of a class. Frequently, the theme drives the courses together and the learning together, and we engage in work prior to COVID, really out and about in the city. And during COVID, it's thematically integrated into these different themes.
Mm. Yeah, and I want to make sure that we sort of regularly address how you're, because you all really, if I'm remembering this right, you launched your first ninth grade class in the fall of 2019, correct?
That is correct.
Which just when I saw that date, it just broke my heart for you because I thought you got a few months in and then bam.
Yeah.
Yeah, it broke our hearts too. And then I think you have to change your lens and say, okay, well, where are the opportunities in this moment? And
Mm-hmm.
just being a scrappy startup and having to adjust and recalibrate based on the circumstance that you're presented. I think one way of looking at challenges is just that, just say it's a challenge. How are we going to get through it? The other way is to say, okay, what opportunities can we unpack? And I give the team a ton of credit for being able to shift and make some adjustments as we found ourselves in a pandemic. As Jane was describing, our executing school pre-pandemic, we spent 40% of our time outside of the traditional school building. So we're
Mm-hmm.
located at 3033 West Glenwood, and so that's our lab. But our real lab is the city of Philadelphia, as Jane did a great job describing. And so, the other 40% of that time we'd be out and about, studying the neighborhoods and engage in different projects with different co-creators and partners that we were connected to.
When you started in the fall of 2019, how big was that first class? And you only start with ninth graders, correct? People can't come in at 11th grade or whatever. You started with a group of ninth graders?
So we actually started with 16 students, ninth graders from 15 different zip codes. So Jane alluded to our
Wow.
focus and interest in being an authentically diverse learning community.
Mm-hmm.
So we did start with a really, really diverse community geographically, racially, ethnically. We had a lot of learning styles, and that was really exciting. And also, if we're being honest, something that we had to navigate, and we still find ourselves navigating. To answer that second part of your question, we do admit ninth and 10th right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so each year our idea was to add a grade. So we started with ninth graders. So we focused on that ninth grade class. And then, this past recruiting cycle, we had 9 and 10. And so now we're seeing applications for 11th grade. And, so long as we have, all of the all of the, and we'll get into this, I suspect, at some point, but to start a private academic school in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you have to be licensed with the Department of Education. And so, part of the criteria is making sure that, all right, you're recruiting for ninth grade. Okay, you're recruiting for ninth and 10th grade. And so you have to get your supplemental and renewal application each year, just to make sure that you're compliant, with the regulations of the Department of Education.
Okay. So right now, how many active students do you have enrolled?
Actively, we have 17 students that we have enrolled, and next year we're targeting somewhere between 20 and 25. What we've realized is you have to be really intentional and thoughtful about how you compose and build out your class. I'm a really, really big believer of, and I think the team is appreciative of this. You're not going to get a second chance to build school culture, and so that is something that we've really, really focused on. You find yourself balancing proof of concept, what happens, to a Revolution School graduate. You want to balance that with the right composition of student body that fit those Jedi core values that we called out.
I have so many other logistical questions, but I want to put that on pause for a second and get back into sort of the curriculum. But this does give me a picture of a pretty small group that you're working with right now, which explains why I saw a lot of the same kids in the pictures.
Absolutely. If I could add something, I think one of the things that's been really important in our creating and co-creating the school rooted in culture is to recognize the humans that are part of this. And it seems really sort of basic. Of course, we're recognizing the humans, but when Henry talks about remaining small, it's been really important to connect with not only the students but the families and the neighborhood, and staying small allows us for those critical connections and that intertwining of their story with ours, because we have a group of really brave, really these are students that jumped in to a founding school, to founding a school, and we talk to them about that all the time, that their role, very much like an entrepreneur in any setting, is they're designing the culture with us. They're designing what's happening. So it's important, and it has remained important to keep an eye on that and keep ourselves cohesive and community focused.
Let's talk a little bit about the curriculum. How does it work? Where does it come from? And the question that I know is on the minds of a lot of listeners is, how do you address the need to meet state standards?
Great questions. Great questions.
Starts with a laugh.
Well, no, just because we are engaged in a paradigm shift here, right? We have a slightly different approach to pedagogy and curriculum than state standards necessarily often entail. And so it's a work of art to build the bridges between what was and what will be. And that's the enterprise that we're engaged in right now, in both honoring, and we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It matters to us that we deliver academically enriched curricular education that prepares kids for college or whatever beyond. But by the same token, we want to do it in ways that leverage their passions and interests, and connect with them in ways that I no longer found most conventional educational approaches, especially in secondary school, doing. So one thing I would say in on the theme of curriculum is each year the staffalty, and we use that word consciously, the faculty and staff agree on curricular themes or project lanes, we call them. And I'll tell you what ours are this year, for instance.
Okay.
Right now, we've just begun our deep dive into water. So water will be the central theme that every single disciplinary course at Revolution will engage with in some way or another. Today in humanities, we are reading excerpts from Thoreau's Walden.
Mm-hmm.
Soon we'll be reading the short story, The Open Boat by Stephen Crane. Um, we talked about the myth of Narcissus, but the science classes are looking at water through a much more scientific lens, and even math. Um, Project Lane is working on water-related numerical issues. In the second trimester here, we focused on the future of humans and machines.
Mm.
So both humanistically and also in the more STEMier subjects, you can perhaps imagine all the coding and futuristic. And I'm sorry that I'm speaking mostly about the course that I teach, but I happen to know that we read Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
for a futuristic dystopian novel. And then in the fall, we had what we thought was a pretty cool theme, going viral. And it actually had 3 strands to it. There was a strand that was obviously about the virus.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you're even aware that there was a pandemic that hit Philadelphia in the year 1793. And there's a
No.
significant Philadelphia-based novel called Fever 1793 that we started with in some ways. So we looked at the virology of the pandemic. We also looked at the politics and persuasion and social media and what it means to go viral in the political sphere, which was extremely relevant, obviously, during the election that was taking place this fall, because going viral was happening in the fall. And then lastly, the whole anti-racist Black Lives Matter movement and the sort of viral progression of that from, not that long ago, Colin Kaepernick was being criticized for taking a knee. And by now, if athletes don't take a knee before certain athletic events, they're almost criticized. So these are themes that we transdisciplinary interact with and synergize with each other to give a lens through which we approach just the standard learning targets and skills and competencies that a state curriculum or other standards are geared toward.
So if okay, so every trimester it sounds like it's just three separate themes throughout a school year. If I am a person in your school who is then responsible for science, if I am a science teacher, where do I go from that point once the theme has been chosen? And obviously it sounds like that's chosen by some sort of a collaborative effort.
Yep.
Do I then go to my standards by myself, or do I go with students to co-create what this semester is going to look like within that theme?
I think some of both, okay? Because the fact is that there are going to be more and better co-creating opportunities with 11th and 12th graders than there might be with 9th and 10th graders, right? So, and we're on the cusp now. We do have one 11th grader enrolled, and he is already becoming a more active co-creator curricularly and pedagogically than any of the 9th and 10th graders are, just by virtue of his self-knowledge and his exposure to this pedagogy for a couple of years. He's starting to discern where his passions lie and what are the most effective ways to reach him curricularly. So we all have our learning targets and we all have our academic goals that need to be developed, but in some cases, it doesn't matter what you're studying in order to accomplish those things. So I think increasingly, as we spiral through our curriculum, students will be taking more and more ownership of, and I think Jane at some point will discuss the Revolution Project idea in a little bit more detail, but it kind of ends with a capstone type, more independent, student-generated project that really is about them.
I just wanted to raise one of the things that Mike shared and just give a little bit of context. He talked about 9th and 10th versus 11th and 12th. And I think one of the things we've learned, if I was observing revolution or thinking about starting something in the spirit of revolution or some of the other PBL schools that are doing awesome work, one of the things that I would share is there's a great deal of scaffolding, especially if you're recruiting, as diverse an audience as we are, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to make sure that in that ninth and 10th grade year, the students have the foundational skills and tools. And I've learned a lot from our staff faculty about how important that is with regard to your admissions process and making sure that, you're able to differentiate in ways that are going to happen as you traverse the experience, programmatically. So, I do think that's a really important point that I just wanted to make sure we raised.
Yeah, I wanted to add too, you were asking about co-creation, and certainly co-creation with the students is part of our mission and our work and the journey in establishing the work that students are really passionate about. But another element of the co-creation happens with the community that surrounds us, and they are a community. And I know we're going to talk about this, but the co-creation piece with regard to the work and the transdisciplinary work happens through program as well as outside of the classroom. So, for example, Mike was talking about the going viral theme.
Mm-hmm.
We one of the projects that the students engaged in worked with a local organization called Philly Cam, and they are an organization that has a mission to empower young people in understanding the voice they can have as both consumers of media, informed, engaged consumers, but also producers of media. So one of the projects that we did had the students learn about creating a video campaign right before the election that they called Vote for Me.
Mm-hmm.
And it had elements of sort of humanities and creating a pitch. We worked with some local entrepreneurs. We also have another partner in a local organization, nonprofit called Fulfill, and they worked with us to help the students understand how to identify something they really care about and talk about why it's important to them. And they learned video skills through PhillyCam, and they were able to create a video that, in the end, the tagline was "Vote for me because I'm too young to vote." But they were
Oh.
able to identify an issue that was important to them. They were able to capture that issue, understand the pieces, the elements of like things they see outside in the city, or um, things that were important to them. So the co-creation does happen with the students, but it also happens with it is made possible through the co-creation that we can do in our community partnerships.
Okay, so let's stick with this example because I'm gonna bring it back to thinking like right now a public high school teacher who's probably thinking that sounds great, but what I'm wondering now is which subject area teachers were involved in that excuse me, in that project. How far back was it planned with Philly Cam? And then also, were all of the students funneled through that project? Did they all have the same expectations? Were the students also at the same time taking other classes at schools? Um, I think I'm picturing what maybe a regular school teacher is thinking, and they're just like, okay, so the kids just sort of like work on these random projects. Like, what was the structure in terms of comparing what that project is, which sounds really relevant and important and something that would really engage the students. How does that fit into maybe what else was going on throughout a regular day? I probably
Yeah.
asked you just 90 questions right now.
No,
Sorry.
I think I can take that, but I'm sure
Okay.
one of my colleagues can pick up where I drop. Or I don't know. I'm not very good with sports analogies. I have two colleagues on here that can probably, I was going to say drop the ball, but I'm not sure if that's right.
No, that's
So
right. That's right. Good job, James.
you can pick up. So that particular project, I'll just focus on Philly Cam.
Yeah.
We started in the summer prior with a plan because we knew that this was happening in the world and this is a big connection. And our arts educator, weaves these themes into the work that they're doing. So they took this up as a project in the art class primarily, and
Okay.
to meet certain standards in art. And she happens to have a lot of background in that kind of production, but we would not have been able to do it without the partners in creating the experience for the students. So there was an emphasis on photography and capturing scenes, but there was also an emphasis on storytelling. So it was something that we were able to engage in the curriculum in different ways in some of our humanities time in creating pitches. And the students were taking other classes during that time. So this was a project that they were doing in their art class, but it was relevant to the going viral theme. So it was those issues that were being raised related to movements, social movements in the world, or how movements take root. Were things that were happening in, for example, the math class also, where they were looking at data around climate change. So that might have made it to the video.
Okay.
The backgrounds were being woven in. Mhm.
So this was not something that took every, all day long for every student. This was a piece of their semester.
It was a piece of their semester, and I want to add, it was done during COVID when we couldn't really meet in person all that much. So this was one of those moments where we recognized the great value of technology, where they were able to kind of go out on their own and do a lot of the filming and capturing and sharing with others the stories that they were collecting.
Do students have a regular daily schedule of classes?
Yes.
That does sort of look like a regular high school, yes?
Yes, yes-ish. Yes-ish.
Okay.
I
love that.
We are not dominated by allegiance to seat time per se, right?
Okay.
It's not about how many hours are named humanities, but each course meets with a certain regularity, and then we have some courses or class meetings that might be called storytelling or writing workshop, which are not disciplinarily associated, but could be relevant to different courses. And it is also true, though, that this year the pandemic has hamstrung us in terms of being out exploring the city as much as we would like, and as much as happened in year one and will happen in years 3 and thereafter.
Right.
We just have really been the advantage, and this is one of the ways that Jane's work has been so helpful. We've been doing more collaborating through Zoom with educators like Ibo Hanan from Abu Dhabi, right?
Dubai.
Wow.
And bringing people across vast distances, but physically we have not been able to explore the city this year under these circumstances as much as we otherwise would like. But I think Henry gave the ratio about 60 or 80% sort of normalish looking classes and 20 to 40% exploration outside the classroom.
You talk about innovating in a pandemic and having to recalibrate and shift. I mean, whether it's Evo from Dubai or Dr. Allison Mackey from Changing Brain Lab down at the University of Pennsylvania, or Dr. Pete Sandeman from Presbyterian, who's a surgeon. These are folks that we would not have otherwise been able to engage in our work so directly. And it created I think a really dynamic learning space, even though it was virtual.
Right. It took you to where you didn't you weren't actually even limited to Philadelphia, and then by necessity you ended up being able to go more global.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the community partnerships a little bit more.
Yeah.
That was one of your visions when you first started the school, to always really involve the community as part of the curriculum. How do those work? You've already given me an example of the Philly Cam partnership. So maybe if you could tell me about one other partnership that's worked really well, and how did that actually get started? Who makes those happen?
I think we all do, but I have had the opportunity to sort of take that role
Mm-hmm.
in I think what we really did, I'll back up a second, is in that year zero, um, we had this original plan, and I am very visual, so I'm going to give you the visual of three circles. We had this idea that teaching and learning, research and innovation, and community activation were these sort of three overlapping circles, and in the center would be the school. And we took it upon ourselves as a team. I think that Henry called it a listening tour, going to schools and going to organizations, to share what we were doing, hear what they were doing, and really understand sort of the strengths and assets in our city and the work that others were doing. So the original intention was this vision of having these different circles where we would not only be activating the community, but documenting it as we went,
Mm-hmm.
along with the teaching and learning. I think what evolved in our community building was a recognition that those partners could also be connected to one another, to both fuel the work that was happening in the school and also fuel each other. The adults also in the conversation, learning together and sharing the kinds of things that we were learning, became a real driver in the connections. And you asked about one of another connection that has been really important. Um, there is, and this speaks to other schools if they might be interested. There is an organization called Report for America. They're part of the Ground Truth Project, and they're all over the United States. They have core members in, I don't know if it's all 50 states, but I came across their work, and they happen to have somebody in Philadelphia working with a local news organization. Their mission is to put young journalists next to young people to tell stories that are happening not only from the perspective of a journalist out in the world as a professional, but also from young people, what they're seeing in their neighborhoods, that sort of solutionary orientation. And their journalists, I think the clear change in the work that they were doing was that they no longer could go physically into schools, but we had a program where they could work alongside our educators and plan program with us. So every week, every Wednesday, we have Michael Butler is a local journalist for Technically in Philadelphia, and he works alongside Mike Pardee. And we have storytelling that we do with young people. And what it enables is this partnership through an organization and with the world of journalism, and leaning into this super important time of storytelling in the world, where someone can say, as a professional, here's how I write about things that I don't really want to write about. Or here's
Mm.
how I edit. Here's the importance of an editor,
Mm-hmm.
having another eye. He brings, a natural teacher, but also someone that brings an authentic perspective to engage and create rapport with the students in a way that enriches all of our experience.
And I would be remiss if I didn't share that as a part of the listening, learning, pitching tour that Jane alluded to. We found ourselves locating initially at 3033 West Glenwood, which is the home of Community Partnership School, whose mission is very much aligned in terms of that, community facing partnership and support. And while we're not, we don't share a mission, I do think that we've inspired each other in the way our program is set up. And, I think they've taken notes from us, and we've certainly had the benefit of sitting next to them. And I think from a sustainability financially, which is a whole separate topic when you're thinking about starting a school, we've had great benefit of being able to, sit beside another school that's about 13 years old and has been where we are.
Okay, I didn't realize you're sort of sharing a building then with another school.
We are.
Got it. Okay. So now that makes me want to ask the question, why not just be a part of the same school? What is it that differentiates Revolution from Community Partnership School?
Good question. So the glaring thing is they go from community partnership goes from kindergarten to fifth grade. We start in ninth grade, so there's actually a gap, and so that's one of the big kind of logistical pieces there.
Yeah.
So
where did those kids go?
We do, yeah. So right. So there's probably an opportunity I'm not naming, but there is in our founding class students that went to community partnership school, matriculated to another school who we have very close ties with, the Philadelphia School on 25th and Lombard, and then ultimately came to Revolution for high school as founding students. So that's kind of a cool story in terms of those three schools working together and trying to be pretty impactful in our city.
Yeah,
cool.
I also think with regard to the idea and the orientation of community partnerships, many times schools that are located in neighborhoods that include the name community partnership, the community partnerships are designed around supporting the schools, so they'll have health services and they'll have connections to all kinds of services for the families, and a lot of our orientation in working with community is co-creation of programs. So one of the things that I am surprised we have not said yet is part of our mission is breaking down the walls between learning and life so that students can kind of engage in this purpose-driven work. And what we see in connecting with individuals who co-create the program with us are thematic connections to content and program.
Jane, explain to us, because you've got the Revolution school website, and then there is this separate entity called School of Thought. And I actually had to have a separate phone call with you just to try to understand what exactly is School of Thought. So just quickly give us an idea of what that is and what purpose it serves.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about School of Thought. So I will say first off that we see the School of Thought as an extension of the school to both fuel the school with the learning that's taking place outside, and also to sort of fuel a learning community of people who are out there answering questions and building community around change in education. And I'm a visual person, so I if I could have a minute, I want to just explain the way that we walk through community a little bit. Has to do with we see sort of concentric circles as we've been growing community, where you sort of have the outside circle as a sort of exploratory circle, and we really begin with the connection of humans. So as we always had in our vision, this community activation, we didn't want it to be, we have a project to do and now we need to find who can do this project with us. We really wanted individuals to sort of to know these individuals as humans in that exploratory area, and they move to the second circle, inner circle, and they sort of become more participatory in our work. So we connect with those individuals, we understand missions, we work with one another in conversation. They might be invited to some of our events where we're learning, getting to know students, and then we move to further in the circle, and this is a made-up word, collaboratory, but we have exploratory, participatory, and when we get to that collaboratory stage, that's when the really doing work with us, maybe projects. And it moves further in. I am a researcher by training, so we go further in and we get to what we call the laboratory. So we're really trying to continue to document as best we can. And, we are in the early stages of this learning, so it is about capturing story and measuring hard to measure things, but also telling the story out. So we move further and further in. And the very center of the story, when we really know we have that rooted co-creation partnership, that's that that's just story. So we go from exploratory, participatory, collaboratory, laboratory to story. And that's kind of the idea of School of Thought, is collecting individuals that move through those pieces with us as humans first, as partners in the work, and then partners in the school.
Okay. I've got the concentric circles in my mind. So it sounds like the expeditions that you all take don't necessarily have a checklist of things to do. It's more of a, who are we meeting? What do we notice? What kind of thoughts does this generate? What problems do you see? What needs do you see? And that the projects can come from those open-ended
Yes.
expeditions.
Yes.
Mhm.
Open-ended
Okay.
open-ended is a revolutionary or revolution-esque thing. Checklist, not so much.
Got
Yeah,
it.
I mean, because we want the learning to be as sticky and relevant as possible, right? The opportunity to keep it open ended leads to great questions and great, you know, observation. And we talk a lot about process over product at Revolution, right? This idea that it is, we're not so focused on, what the end goal is we are making sure students have a real appreciation of their process, their individual process, and we think the projects that we've engaged in bode well for that.
I would add to we're calling them expeditions. We do engage in a sort of field work. So Henry was mentioning the Neighborhoods Project. One of the things that the students identified as a piece of interest in getting to know the neighborhood were the murals. Philadelphia is a big murals city, and one of the things that the students started to ask about were what the stories were behind the murals. And as a result, we were able to partner with the Mural Arts program. And again, students engaged in a project where they were going out into the neighborhood, asking neighbors about what they knew about the stories and recording interviews with individuals. They researched um, the stories behind the murals. They actually worked, I think, Henry, they worked in math in there, where they were understanding the measurements and sort of how they work to scale. Excuse me.
Right.
And they created podcasts. So if you go on a tour of the murals in Philadelphia, those are actually everlasting. So one of the pieces of our mission also is in engaging in projects and working in the city. We want to be able to have the students do things that are sort of sustainable, that are both of benefit to the learning the students are engaging in, but also of benefit to others, to be able to be something that can sustain. And that's an example of that.
And that whole project just evolved from somebody asking a question on an expedition. What's the story behind these murals?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And actually, that might be a place. And Jane has recently written about our efforts to engineer serendipity, which is perhaps an oxymoronic concept. But
you can do it.
But and in the history of revolution, I can just think of all sorts of ways that serendipity has been engineered into the DNA of this adventure. And there's a lot of carpe dieming of cool serendipitous things that happen. And since we aren't handcuffed to a particular curriculum or to disciplinary silos in the ways that many schools are, we can take advantage of those serendipitous opportunities.
You're saying a couple of things that are reminding me that I have because it sounds like what you do is you just lay a lot of groundwork for wonderful things to happen. Basically, you
Yes.
create the conditions
Yes.
under which these things are likely to happen. So again, my mind is going back toward the brain of somebody who is actually handcuffed in,
Yes.
let's do this as some rapid fire questions. Do students get grades at your school?
Yes.
Okay. Do they take standardized tests?
They
Well,
might not in our school. We're not a test prep school, but we
Right.
recognize the value of tests. And I think that it is part of our story to share all of the evidence that is mounting on the benefit to the learning in this approach and what it does for standardized test
Yes.
scores. So all of our students are given the opportunity to take those tests. When you say standardized tests, I think of standardized tests, we're talking about high stakes tests. Are you?
or
Well,
SATs.
no, I realize that they're
Yeah.
gonna want to take ACT and SAT
Yeah.
in order to get into college. But
Yeah.
as a private school, correct? You are not required to do
No,
anything
no,
beyond.
No.
Right.
no. So they don't.
Yeah, the spirit of your question, Jennifer, I think was about like keystones, PSSAs, those kinds of things. MSAs. I was in Maryland. No, we do not. We're not beholden to those standardized tests.
Okay. So it is a private school.
Yes.
And let's just also for people listening, and I already know the answer to this, but what is the full tuition?
35,000
Okay. And is that for a year or for the 4 years?
for a year.
Per year. Okay. But you do have a sliding scale, correct?
We do.
And you encouraged all applicants to complete the paperwork for that, because the message that I was getting on there is that people would be surprised by how many of them would actually qualify for some sort of adjustment.
That is correct.
Okay. When I read about what you were offering, and I thought this sounds so wonderful, and I thought to me it seems like only the kind of education that very privileged kids would be able to have access to. But then I also saw that you have a really strong commitment to diversity in all forms, and that with your tuition policy, that's a big piece of that. How then it how do you balance that? How do you balance the need to actually run the school financially with that commitment to diversity and giving opportunity to students from all economic backgrounds?
We're constantly, I think, sharing our story and sharing the important work that we're, I think, starting to show evidence of executing on. That's both in, when you're engaged with prospective donors and, considering writing grants. I think that's really, really important in cultivating those relationships. And I think similarly on the admission side of it, you have to constantly share, the work that's happening in the space and how important that work is and exactly how we're doing it.
So to make up the difference then for the students that are not who qualify basically for reduced tuition, that money is made up through donations and grants?
Yes.
Okay. That's because I guess that's another question is, well, I guess, and here's my other sort of bigger question, because we're definitely going over the time I told you you're going to need. But if I am an educator in a public school and I'm listening to you and I'm thinking I would love to be able to do something like this in my school, because obviously if somebody is able to just jump out of the public school system completely and start fresh, they can do it however they want. How could you, if you wanted to do something like this in a public school, where would you start?
This is where I think you need a team, because the transdisciplinary and co-creating and collaborative aspects of this, I think, are built into the DNA, and they're sort of deal breakers if you don't have them. So I do believe it's possible to engage in some field work within a discrete class. But if you don't have maybe a principal or an assistant principal or some other colleagues, ideally from other departments, who are willing to let you take their kids, your kids and their kids out of their class for their precious moments of seat time, it's going to be difficult, right? And once you asked a question, Jennifer, that made me want to emphasize that time-wise, we are in a much more labor-intensive faculty culture here, right? We do a lot more planning among and between teachers than I think is typical in many schools where they just shut the door, and the teacher does his or her thing. So, of course, there are aspects that can be done around the edges in a sort of circumscribed ad hoc way. But I think in order to really realize this vision fully, you kind of need a more micro schoolish approach. And therefore you need some collaboration and synergy and symbiosis among some group of crazy innovative people who are willing to take such a leap.
This is funny because about 4 years ago, I interviewed people in York, Pennsylvania, just less than an hour away from you. And they are in a public high school and they're doing what you're describing. It's an English teacher, a social studies, and an art teacher. And they've created a 3-hour block of time within their school where they're doing similar things to this. So, yeah.
I think we wrote about them in one of our School of Thought articles. Yeah. In identifying all the different work that's going on, there are lots of pockets of innovative work. And some schools have a harder time changing the culture of the entire school. There are schools in this area that we are partnered with right now, and there are innovative teachers within those schools that it's not that they're doing secretive work, but it's not, they can't change their 300-year-old institution that's been literally 300 years old. You know, so
it's one of the huge takeaways that we had when we were out and about initially trying to engage the community and doing that listen and learning and pitching tour. You know, we would go to school A or B or C, and they weren't necessarily all independent schools. Some were charter, some were public. And, you know, they'd say, oh my gosh, we heard about what you're doing and we want to know how you're doing it. And lo and behold, when we started hiring, we had 55 applications for 3 spots in the course of maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And these were folks from all over the world, quite frankly. And what it was evidence of was the excitement and the momentum and the energy behind the kind of work that we're doing. And again, we're not the only ones, but you know, we're talking about it, and you know, we're out and about, you know, sharing our story and our narrative with some of the awesome artwork that Jane was able to produce to get you interested in what we're doing. So
she needs to keep doing that. It definitely grabbed me.
I love doing that. It's you know, it actually originated as a part of the work we were doing when we were looking to all the stories that are happening. And I think of a lot of these as research, and so often the translation of research to practice sometimes doesn't happen as easily as it could. And the original intention behind some of the visuals was really to begin messaging, you know, capturing stories that could be told visually in ways that you know, words alone were more challenging.
So I could probably talk to you all for another hour with all of my other questions, but I'm going to just tell people that they need to go to revolutionschool.org, and you all have done a really nice job on the website of predicting those questions and answering those frequently asked questions there. Thank you, first of all, so much for the time that you've given me. And I just wish you the best of, you know, the future in terms of getting past now all the restrictions and being able to see your school grow and flourish post-COVID.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The way that you envision.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
It's such an honor to get to be on your podcast.
Long time listener and reader.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
First time caller.
Well, and you guys are probably going to get a lot of, you're probably going to get contacted now by a lot of people with questions. So you may want to designate a person as the recipient of all those calls.
That might be
probably
going
to be people.
I like doing that. I love talking to people about what we're doing. And
we'll just keep recycling Jane's artwork, and whenever it'll represent some of those questions. Maybe some answers in there.
To read more about Revolution School and read a transcript of this interview, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 169. To get a weekly email from me about my newest blog posts, podcast episodes, courses, and products, sign up for my mailing list at cultofpedagogy.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.